Hello, everybody. I'm not Kristen Monroe, and unfortunately for Kristen,
I really had
she
a
has
and everything.
she had infected some sort of virus, this stomach flu of some sort this afternoon. So unfortunately, she is not with us this evening, but I'd like, on her behalf, to welcome everybody to UCI's Interdisciplinary Center for the Scientific Study of Ethics and Morality's annual dinner. My name is Roxy Silver, and I am on the board of directors for the center. And so I got lassoed into trying to pretend that I'm Kristen for just one evening, but as all of you must know, by from knowing Kristen, she certainly cannot be replaced, and nobody can even stand in her shoes. But I'm going to try to just move the program forward a little bit this evening in a couple of directions. First of all, just a little bit about the center. I believe most of us who are in this room know about the center, but Kristen has been its director since its founding. We're trying to remember exactly the year, but it's certainly within the last decade that the center has been quite an active and exciting place for the study of ethics and morality on the UCI campus. And I have been on the board of directors for probably 5 years, so I've been involved with Kristen and several other faculty members in trying to make sure that the campus is aware of the excellent work that's being done out of the center. Tonight's award ceremony is going to involve a couple of things. First, I want to introduce the various students and interns who work with those of us on at the center, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do, and then we're going to hear a talk from two of the individuals who've been working with Kristen, and then we will give her the 2011 Paul Silverman Award. But first, the interns are at this table. I'd like to ask the interns to stand and introduce yourself, where you're from, and what you've actually been doing with Kristen at the center. Maybe a few of you can stand up.
This past summer we worked on doing interviews. We interviewed quite a number of people, and then we've taken the actual interviews themselves and broken them down to loosely.
And your name?
Jonah Blackhead.
And your
My name is Chloe Lampos Monroe, and I'm the daughter of Kristen Monroe. During the summer, we did 2 projects. We did the interview project.
Oh, we can't hear over here.
maybe turn this on.
Why don't you go to the microphone?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
You can come up with her.
Okay, so there were 2 projects that we worked on over the summer. There was the interview project that Jonah just talked about, and there was a project where we did a survey on altruism and generosity that we were analyzing the results of. So that was basically what we've been working on so far.
Great, and thank you for your efforts on the center. There's some candies for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps the graduate interns can stand and introduce themselves. We'll start with Adam, and then we'll move to this table.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you. My name is Adam Martin. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science. My project for most of the last year has been with the very generous assistance of Dr. Silver and her colleagues, doing a multi-year study on after effects and psychological concomitants of dealing with attacks on 9/11.
We can't hear you. Despite the microphone.
Okay,
Oh, that's better, yeah.
It works if you
Sorry.
talk into it.
Yeah, right.
my name is Adam Martin. My dissertation project right at the moment, what are the psychological factors that might predict forgiveness of the 9/11 terrorists? Analyzing that data so far right now for a dissertation I hope to defend in early fall. Preliminary, apparently there seem to be certain cognitive factors which are associated with this, namely, among other things, centered in the present in terms of your temporal orientation, not getting stuck in the past, finding meaning in the events somehow, and also finding unexpected positive consequences seems to be something that can predict that, as well as certain kinds of religious orientations that give us a window towards this. And I'm hoping to pursue some of these findings further. I'm hoping to pursue some of these findings further.
Thank you. And there's some graduate students, I think, also here.
No.
Oh, these are undergrads. Are you?
I'm the undergrad student.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't move all that fast. For those of you who've seen me, the knee is getting better. I'm also very short. Hi, I'm Johanna. I am Christy's advisee, as well as working with her this summer with the Ethics Center. So I'm not quite an intern yet, but I will be supervising interns. I have been working on a project looking at the social psychological factors involved in intractable conflicts, specifically the Middle East, and I look at Israel-Palestine. More specifically, I'm studying the Olive Tree Initiative on campus and the role of diaspora communities and the interventions that social psychologists and political scientists use in attempts to kind of make the situation better here in the US. So I will be working on this as a broader project for probably many years, although not nearly a dissertation yet. But that's what I do.
Yes, this is handed to you, and maybe you can share it a little bit.
This is
with
going in the
Adam.
office.
We next have a presentation this evening by two people who've been working with Christy, is that correct? And I only know the first names, but I'll have them introduce themselves directly. Shant and Steve are going to talk to us a little bit about their work over the last year, and perhaps you can do a more formal introduction. I just don't have the information, I'm sorry.
Of course.
Hello, my name is Sean Magridichyan. I'm a psychology undergraduate student at UCI. And yeah, I've been working with Professor Monroe for 2 quarters now on this research that we're doing.
And my name is Siv Heidi Ottesen. I'm an undergraduate studying political science, but I'm actually an exchange student from Queen Mary University of London, and I've been working with Chris Monroe for 2 semesters now as well.
So the name of our research topic is A Darkling Plain, Humanity During Wars, Genocide, and Other Political Disasters. And this is a poem that inspired Professor Monroe very much. It's by Matthew Arnold, and it's called Dover Beach from 1867. I can read it real quick. The sea is calm tonight, the tide is full, the moon lies fair. Upon the straits, on the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast, out in the tranquil bay. Come to the widow, sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray, where the sea meets the moon, blanched land. Listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling, and their return up the high strand. Begin the seas and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the the Aegean and brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery, we find also in the sound of thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once two at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain, and we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of a struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. And she writes, Professor Monroe put this part up too. I guess the relation of the poem to the work, an eternal theme to the work. We all experience personal tragedies and carry sadness and grief. What enables some of us to still go on and live rich lives? So that was kind of the question that Professor Monroe had to ask. And she was using this research as finding a way of how people go on to live rich lives.
So that was one of the inspirations for this project. However, another inspiration was the course that was Professor Monroe taught in fall of 2010, which was a course titled Genocide and Terror. And in this course, I think there were about 80 students, and I was actually an undergraduate taking this course. And one of our main assignments was to interview a person that had been affected by war, terror, genocide, or any form of other political disaster. So we had to interview them, and we had 3 questions to ask them. We had to ask them about any moral dilemmas they had experienced and how they retained their humanity, and just kind of generally about their experiences. So when these projects came in, Professor Monroe was absolutely stunned by the vast amount of experiences. I mean, she thought it was so incredible that all these students had people as close to them with experiences from World War II and the El Salvadorian Civil War, and she was just really impressed with all the stories. There was even an Armenian genocide survivor. So she decided to write a book, an article, and then a book, and that's how me and Shant also got in contact with her. So she was just really impressed with the quality of the interviews. So the importance of the work. There's not really. Well, the war's usual effect on people is devastating. War brings out the worst in humankind, destroying and pitting us against each other's. So the title of our project, Retaining Humanity During War, is important because of this. We need to know what helps some people keep their humanity. Is it related to later success in life or forgiveness? It also gives us an insight into the heart of ethics, because what really drives the scholarship of ethics is the concern to discover what takes people to this moral, superior place. And studying what helps people survive war, genocide, and other political disasters is therefore extremely valuable. So there's very little scholarly work on this. There's very little social science or systematic empirical work. Me, Shant, and Professor Monroe all tried to dig deep into different literature and psychology, and what we found was it's generally a theme in plays and books. War and Peace, for example, by Tolstoy, how to retain your humanity during war. We found some literature on post-traumatic stress disorder, coping, and post-traumatic growth, and Shant will talk more about that.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Bettelheim's work in a way. So Bettelheim, his research, his theory focused on situational influences on personality. He also focused a lot on environment. So the environment around you and your personality kind of affects the way you respond to trauma and what you're going to do, how you're going to keep your humanity eventually in the future. And Frankl's research and theory, search for meaning. Frankl disagrees with both Freudian psychoanalytic approach, which is stressing the will to survive as a dominant life force, and Adler stressing the desire for power as a basic drive. Frankel's theory basically focuses on the search for meaning in the face of suffering as a fundamental force driving mankind. So Frankel basically just looked for, he had his own theory on what drove people to keep going on with life.
So the data and methodology. As I stated before, there are more than 50 in-depth interviews with people who lived through wars, genocide, and similar political tragedies. We really only focused on 25 of them, which we thought were we picked the best ones, and then we did a narrative interpretive analysis, and then we did coding. We highlighted all the important themes in the different interviews, and we plugged it into a program called In Vivo, which helps you analyze different data. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the different people that we interviewed, and they have really, really interesting stories. So,
would you like us to name off the interviews? We can do that. So Herb was a Holocaust survivor, and he was an Austrian Jewish Holocaust survivor. And
Laura Hillman was actually number 287 on Schindler's List, and she has a very interesting story. She actually, when her mother and her brothers would be taken away to concentration camps, she wrote a letter to the secret police in Germany asking to be taken away with them. So she has a lot of interesting stories to tell.
And then there was Malfada, who was a Portuguese royalty, and she lived in Portugal during the resistance of July 20th plot.
And then we have Grace and Kukuye, who were both Japanese interns in the Second World War in the USA.
And Horst was a Jewish camp survivor, and I can just and Frank, who was a U.S. soldier in the Pacific during the World War II. Myra London Blitz, Ida Amin, who was a survivor in Uganda, and Sarah and Kimberly, who experienced the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Iraq War, Eric and Menendez, South Vietnam, Tuan Vo. He had a pretty interesting story too, and he actually experienced a lot of suffering. He was a soldier. He had to fight against some of his relatives because there's both sides to it. And he went through a re-education camp, and he actually escaped Vietnam over on a boat, and he was on the boat for 7 days without food. And then there was a Nicaragua Civil War survivor, Wong, Soviet War in Afghanistan, Rashan, and Lebanese Civil War, Marie and Talia. Iran, there was an interview we did from someone who was in Iran during the 1979 revolution. Layla, her name is Layla, and then El Salvador Civil War news.
So now we're going to go over what me and Sean kind of worked on. The main findings of our project. So me and Sean, our job working with Kristen Monroe was basically to go through all the interviews and really highlight what different themes were common in the different 25 interviews that we analyzed closely, and to draw on things that showed what really helped these people retain humanity during war. So the first kind of theme that we found was view of self, and view of self is very important because if the individual experiencing the war sees themselves not as a victim but as a survivor, then that kind of helps them gain agency, and how they kind of like self-perceive themselves and how their identity is constructed is it can be constructed by various elements, but how they think about their identity and how they kind of like process this is extremely important, because it kind of gives them a moral credo as to what's right and wrong in war, and it helps them, if they see themselves as survivors, they gain a sense of agency and a sense of self, and this is really critical in influencing their behavior and what they do in war, genocide, or whatever political disaster that they might be going through. So 2 people that really emphasized this very much in their interviews were Layla, the Iranian professor, and here are some quotes. You can see them. I'll read one of them. I know that if I accepted everything the government wanted me to do and to teach, it would be wrong. I have my values. After they tried to impose something on me that went against those values, I did not want to teach anymore. I knew it was done. So Layla was a history professor who actually hid 3 of her students in her basement during the time of the Iranian Revolution. And she did this, and nobody knew about it. So she did this really because it was who she was as a person, and she can't, even though it was war and she could have died and she jeopardized the lives of not only herself but her family, she did it because she really gained the sense of agency that she had to do it, and it was kind of like, it would be going against her identity if she didn't do it. The next slide. And one other person who really emphasizes this view of self is Kimberly from the Khmer Rouge. My parents said, let's live day by day. We won't forget who we are, and we won't let anything take away from who we are. Even though we're living in the water or in a shack, we are still who we are. So just maintaining that sense of self.
And we have another one, which is a sense of belonging. We had a lot of when we were doing the interviews or reading the interviews that were transcribed, we realized that a sense of belonging was something that really helped the people who are experiencing the trauma or genocide or war to go on through with what they're experiencing and kind of feel that the actions that were being taken place wasn't directed towards them, and it was actually directed it was just a political thing that was going on at the time. Over here we have an example of Herb, who is a Holocaust survivor, and from the quote you can see that him belonging to the Zionism organization kind of helped him belong to something who had a bunch of people who were experiencing the same kind of suffering. I can read the quote. It's, "This turning to Zionism was a helpful way of maintaining one's self-esteem. That, yes, we were being prosecuted, but it didn't make us question ourselves. It didn't ever raise questions that somehow that I or my people deserved this treatment we were being subjected to." Here's one that Steve just mentioned, Layla, who's from the Iranian Revolution, and things that really inspired us to survive, to live through all this, regardless of if we didn't have food or clothing, was to think that there's somebody out there, especially a parent that loves you, that bond, it's strong. It is so strong that nobody can break it apart. Physically, they can break you apart from each other, but emotionally, you can hear your dad's voice or your sister's voice, and you think of the memories of good times. So in Layla's case, her family was kind of a way of helping her get through things and feel a belonging to something, and that she wasn't alone in her experiences. Fatalism was another one. Fatalism is when individuals usually feel a loss of hope during what they're experiencing. We put nuanced effect because fatalism seems to have a good effect and a bad effect. In a way, if someone loses hope and doesn't feel like they can do anything, that's a bad effect, and they feel like they're gonna be killed and that there's no way of getting out. But we had some interviews that people actually mentioned fatalism as a way of helping them get through what they were suffering, because knowing that there was nothing they can do and it was just something that was happening didn't kind of play with their emotions, and they knew that they couldn't do anything. And yeah, so over here we have Frank, who is from the World War II. He actually states fatalism as something good. It was fatalism. It was, if something's going to get you, it'll get you. If it's not, it will not. That was the basic thing. And so, and when you're asked the question, and so what did you substitute religion for? Fatalism. In the beginning, you are born, you don't choose your parents, you don't choose the date. The same way when you finally leave the world. So Frank Lynch was a very interesting man. He mentioned how luck was how everything kind of took its way. Everything that happened to him was luck, and He actually had no hope for anything really. It was just going through life, and whatever happened kind of happened. And we have Grace, who's an attorney. This has a negative effect, but what could we do? There wasn't anything we could do. There wasn't much anybody could do. You just had to do what you had to do. What could we have done? There's nothing. We had to stay where we were. So Grace, even though the internees didn't have the most horrible experience from what we saw in interviews, they still felt like they had no hope of doing anything, and so there was a loss of hope, and I guess that had a negative effect for them.
So hope is extremely important. The psychology of hope and believing that there's light at the end of the tunnel is extremely important in retaining humanities in war. Hope really influences, motivates an individual and gives them something to strive towards. Snyder has produced a body of literature about this, about goal-directed thinking, and how it's important helping individuals utilize both something called pathway thinking, which is the capacity to find routes to meet desired goals, and agency thinking, which is a requisite motivation to use these routes. So to provide an individual with a goal, aspirations, it really gives them a sense of agency, and that will eventually help them survive the war because they have something to kind of look forward to and they have something to strive towards. Louis, a refugee from the El Salvadoran Civil War, really emphasizes this. He says that my family was always in my concern and I wanted a better future for them. Not in El Salvador, which was too dangerous for us to live in anymore. We needed to be in a better place. The hope for a better future always kept me going. If it was something that helped me recover, it was my own sanity. So for him, it was moving his family to the United States from El Salvador. That was really his motivation in everything he did in the El Salvadorian Civil War. And Herb Kelvin also exemplifies this. So you have to imagine that there's another life that you may try to create for yourself as good or even better than one you have. So while you're experiencing the horrible political disaster, you have to try to kind of imagine another life for yourself, and that will help you retain your humanity and keep on to who you are. So loss. We found that there was a correlation between how much you have to lose and how it affects your actions and reactions to those perpetrators who are doing something against you. If you have more to lose, you're more likely to be angry or have kind of negative feelings towards the perpetrators who are doing the thing against you. Of course, what you consider a lot to lose is different if you consider it to be materialistic goods or something else. And it also, of course, links to your idea of happiness, what you consider to be happiness and what you consider, again, a lot to lose. So we can really see a contrast here with Sarah, who is a Cambodian, who is part of the Khmer Rouge, who really had a lot of hate towards the communists. The communists, they're so bad, they destroyed everything. My home, my life, my family, they destroyed everything. Compared to Grace and Kikuyi, who were Japanese internees. So when we went to the camp, we didn't lose anything. We didn't even lose a house. And Kikuyi, we did not have anything to go back to. We had nothing to lose. So the fact that they had nothing to lose and nothing really to hang on to made the experience a lot easier for them, as opposed to Sarah, who was actually an extremely wealthy woman. You can also read Herb Kelman's quote, exemplifies this point perfectly. We were not a wealthy family, so there was not that much to lose. This is what I think was the thing that cost people their lives. They had so much to lose that they couldn't think about leaving. Culturally, yes, we were integrated, but financially we were not that integrated. The idea of going elsewhere and trying a new life was not that frightening, in a sense.
And we had the theory, concept of cognitive stretching. Cognitive stretching is when the individual prepares themselves for what they're going to experience. So say if you're in the Holocaust, a lot of people did prepare themselves for death. And that was a way of dealing with what was happening in the time. Here we have Wong from Nicaragua. I came to such a comfortable level with death. Once you accept your death is inevitable and that perhaps it is better than living, death does not scare you as much. So, like I said, here you can see Wong doing exactly what I had mentioned, and he had prepared himself for death, so that made the experience not as horrible. as it could have been. And then there's Tuan, because every day when I was in the war, I knew that each day could have been the last. I knew what to expect, but in the camp I didn't. You sick, no medicine. There's nothing you can do. You don't know when you get out. That's the re-education camp. I die there, you know. If I stay longer, I will die. So Tuan, he mentioned in his interview when he was a soldier, he could kind of prepare himself for what he was going to experience. He knew he was going to shoot at people. He knew he could have been killed. But the re-education camp somewhat played a lot with his head because he didn't know what was going on. And he said that was worse than fighting in the war, which was very interesting. So, yeah.
So, linked to previous life, when an individual is going through some form of war or other political disaster, the fact that they have something, an element of stability or something linked to their previous life really means a lot to them. Herb Kelman, for example, shows that the maintenance of a nuclear family really helped him. But our nuclear family remained intact. I would say that was probably the major factor in making this whole experience not a classically traumatic experience. So just the fact that he had his family there with them kind of made it seem like not everyday life, but it made it a bit easier. Also the two Japanese girls, Grace and Kikui, their experiences was made a lot easier by the fact that they had their nuclear family intact, and just this old life kind of like kept in place was made it easier for them to retain their humanity because their core was not shaken. They still had something from their old life that they valued and helped them retain their humanity. So coping mechanisms. There was all the individuals which we interviewed coped very, very differently with war and the traumatic experiences they experienced during war. Either you kind of choose to talk about it, or you choose to internalize it, which means you won't talk about it in any kind of great depth. There was a lot of different types of responses. The first one shows how Mendes found it extremely comforting to talk openly about his experiences. He says, "There was a mandatory post-conflict counseling session. I mainly kept my sanity by talking to people and being open with what I have done. I believe secrets will eat you up." Also, it was interesting because some of the individuals found that not only talking, they didn't feel like they had to talk about it, but they felt like it was their duty to pass on their knowledge. Kimberly says that, "I'll tell it because I'm passing on my knowledge. I have been there. I have felt it." And Laura Hillman says that writing this book helped me a lot. It was my catharsis. It really was. So they felt kind of a duty to pass on their knowledge because, of course, this is also one of the main important things about this project. If you don't, eventually the people who have gone through these wars, genocides, or other political disasters will pass away, and the knowledge that they pass on to us is extremely important. Louis says that, "I do not want to think about such things anymore. I left El Salvador in the past, and now I'm in California. I only think about California now. I saw horrible things happen in my country, but as I said before, I'm putting everything that happened in the past, and I try not to think about what happened." So for him, it was not. It's important to emphasize that just because an individual doesn't cope by talking about it, it doesn't necessarily mean they've internalized it and it's eating them up. They can internalize it for different reasons. And Grace says, I don't even want to think about it. You just had to push it to the back of your mind. Besides, I don't have to be worrying about that at my age now. Not with everything that's going on in the world today. It was something that nobody should have to go through. So the need to repress their experiences is for a variety of reasons. You can ignore it like Louis or Grace. You can kind of cope with it differently. But Laura Hillman said something really wonderful, that it doesn't really matter how you do it, but it can be done privately about not talking. And if the coping is done privately, then it doesn't necessarily mean that an individual is ignoring it.
So happiness is something that was very shocking to us to come across, only because these experiences aren't very happy, and so we kind of started to understand that the people who felt happy were the ones who were children during their experiences. They were taken, some like Grace and Kikui, who were in Japanese internment camps, said that it was something, a new experience, and they were still with their family, and and the internment camps wasn't a horrible experience. They were getting paid for working, and they were with their friends. They could go to the movies within the internment camp, so they were having a good time, and they were being protected at the same time. Here you can see Grace. Well, I was young, and kids have fun. I didn't have anybody to tell me anything. And Kikui, I thought of it like an adventure or something. I was happy and I was not worried. It was like a picnic, because when you are young, you don't worry, you are carefree. So you can also take away that the parents were the ones who were actually not carefree, and they were the ones who were striving to take care of their kids. And these two children seemed to felt very safe and didn't feel like they were actually in a trauma, war, or anything of that type. And then there was Kimberly, who was in Cambodia, who was also young. When the time we got there, as a young child, I say, hey, no more school, no mom and dad to tell us what to do, and we were free. So even though she was not with her parents, she still felt like it was something something good was happening, but I'm sure that changed a lot eventually. But as you can see, Grace and Kikui is very much a sense of happiness during their experience. And then there's guilt. A lot of people who were experiencing guilt either lost someone that were close to them. Say we had Luis, who he said that he had a friend who he could have saved a second. If you pulled him away from the bullets in a second, then he would have been saved, and he felt guilty that he didn't do that. And he actually brought his kids. His friend passed away because of the bullet, and then he brought his friend's kids and family to America because of the guilt that he was experiencing. And then there was Eric, who was an Iraq veteran, and he realized that the war wasn't all what he expected it to be. He thought he was helping the Iraqi people, but he also realized that he wasn't really helping them. He was making things worse. That's what his opinion was. And he actually ended up giving them food and books, and he gave them his paychecks too, that he would get from the military. And there's Laura Hillman, who is a Holocaust survivor, and she said the guilt for staying alive. Most of us had guilt feelings. Why didn't my parents live? Why did I live? So her guiltiness, her feelings of guilt come from why did her close ones pass away, but she stayed alive, which is, I'm sure that's very hard to deal with emotionally. And she asked that question till today. And here we have who's to blame. From a lot of the interviews, you can see that the people weren't really blaming the individuals or parties. They're mostly blaming the government for what was happening and some decisions that people were making that caused them to suffer the way they did. Over here you have Frank from World War II. Yes, what you began to understand is that things are not just straightforward, and there are these other inner relationships. I didn't completely understand at the moment why their things went on, but when you became older and more mature, you could look back and see what really had gone on and why these things occurred. So you can see here that Frank's not directly blaming anyone. He kind of says that as he grew up, he understood that it was like a political situation. That's what I got from it. And what was happening was just happening because of what the situation was at the time. And here you have Luis from El Salvador. The problem was that it wasn't right for the workers to riot because they didn't work for it to have a higher position. It wasn't right. People who are specialized in certain occupation should just do the best they can do in their job. But at the same time, the government should have made sure that more people were educated so they would be able to get better jobs so the people would have a better life. So here you can see Luis blaming both the workers who were protesting and who caused the revolution, and the government who wasn't providing the people with what they needed and making the people live in horrible situations. And he also makes another statement. When Oscar Romero tried to help the poor, the other side eliminated him because he was their voice since the poor didn't have a voice, and politics killed him. And for this reason, I don't like politics. And you can see here clearly that he blames politics for the outcome of his friend's death. And, yeah.
So, Kristen unfortunately isn't here to make the conclusion, but I guess our conclusion is that this is important to study because for the field of ethics, and also it kind of fills in, as Sean talked about in the beginning, Bettelheim versus Franklin. It fills in some gaps that life is not kind of black and white. There's also things that we can learn from studying how there's things that we can learn about these individuals in war, because they really show that happiness can be found, they show how to retain humanity during war.
Well, I guess what we can conclude out of this is that, well, first of all, there wasn't a lot of research done on retaining humanity. So this was a very important topic to research on. And as you look at the theories of Frankl and Bettelheim, you kind of realize that they kind of made it into a black and white situation where after reading these interviews and conducting interviews ourselves, we realized that it's not very black and white, and it's kind of a situation that you got to go by situation by situation. People are experiencing different things, and they cope with it differently. And we found these theories or these concepts that kind of interrelate with each other, but everyone has a different story, and retaining your humanity is different for everyone, and how they experience it and how they retain their humanity. We also ended up seeing a lot of people. It was hard to kind of find out a scale of how you judge on if someone kept their humanity or didn't. So that was something else that we had a hard time with. That was left up to our judgment ourselves. But there was some clear situations where you kind of can say that they didn't retain their humanity and that they did retain their humanity. An example could be the Iraqi war veteran who in order for him to prepare himself to fight in the war, he had to play video games, and the video games kind of helped him, his targets helped him kind of distance himself from the targets, and didn't really emotionally get in touch with the targets that he was shooting at in these games that children play today. I guess kind of helped them prepare for that kind of interaction. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the fascinating presentation. I'd like to invite Jerry Tobis up here. Jerry, do you want to come up Jerry's going to award the UCI Interdisciplinary Center for the Scientific Study of Ethics and Morality annually gives an award, the Paul H. Silverman Award for Outstanding Scientific Work on Ethics. And so we're going to ask Jerry to give the 2011 award this year.
Before I do, I want to express the absence of Kristen Monroe, whose remarkable leadership has provided UCI with a major center for ethics. On the other hand, I also want to recognize that a very valuable person is here tonight, in Betty Vaughn, who, in spite of disability, is joining us. And I want to congratulate you for coming.
Thank you.
I have the honor tonight to give the award of the Silverman
One time I moved out of Indian,
Award,
Jerry.
whose memory, as many of us to this day esteem with love and respect for what he contributed. Not only was he an outstanding scientist, but a compassionate, caring human being who represented the very best in ethics. I have the honor to bestow on Ron Coombs the Silverman Award for tonight. In the absence of Kristen, I've been asked to read a statement about Ron. I guess he prepared this actually, but I'm going to read it. It's somewhat extensive, but I hope you'll bear with me. Almost 50 years ago, I'm speaking for Ron, I started in medical oncology, a budding field at the Johns Hopkins Medical Center. I was always shy, but found it easy and rewarding to listen to patients. They wanted to talk. Listening to their stories proved to be essential and improved my interaction with patients and families. Their appreciation and respect guided me later in private practice.
You don't have to go any further. I wrote that slide. This is a paper, it's two parts, and I had no idea. This is a complete surprise to me, and I'm floored. One of our colleagues, Elena Bazufova, wanted to know how I got into the class that I'm teaching with third-year medical students, in which she participates also. And then Kristen asked me to describe what I do with the third-year students, so I made it. First part is the history, and the second part is what we do. And I'm floored. I don't know what to say, but I know he doesn't want to read what I wrote. I wrote it, and I know. Let me just say a few things. Thank you. I think I know what bribery does, because he told me he was nominating me, but he didn't tell me I was winning, and I think it probably was because he paid some of the people on the committee. Yes, there are important people here who have been great supporters of Kristen's program, and but the greatest supporter of this program is Kristen. What a fabulous lady she is, and I too am sorry that she's not here. But you, past a winner also of this award, are a marvelous person. You're my role model, and I hope I can live up to what you've done in the field of ethics. I was very interested in the presentation that was just given. You interviewed people and got their feelings about the subject that was painful and personal. And I feel that that's what physicians need to learn. And yet I find they're so wrapped up in the science that they sort of look at that patient with pneumonia as if it were one of 10 identical patients, and they know what the best evidence-based care would be, and they apply it to the patient. But I think it's important, and I think all of you, if you've been a patient, know that it's important to bring out the person as well as to apply the science. Sometimes it's very crucial that we hear from the patient, but I'm trying to convince the physicians, particularly, are any surgeons in the group? I'm trying to convince surgeons that they should be more willing to get to know their patient as a person, and we know many surgeons who do, but they are pushed. Not only do they have to see their patients every day in the hospital, but they also have to spend time in the operating room, so they're really doing double duty, and so time becomes important. And they think that holding hands and supporting people is perhaps more than what they should be doing. So when I began running across articles that show there is a physiological benefit from helping patients reduce their stress levels, there's better healing, better control of diabetes, better control of blood pressure, many things along the line. And cancer patients are benefited. They live longer. They don't get the recurrent disease as fast as others who have high stress levels. And several institutions now have grants from the National Institutes of Health that will support further study of the negative effects of chronic stress on illness, including a $4.5 million grant to the MD Anderson this past winter. So with that fact that not only do we emotionally feel better when we connect with our patients and they feel better, but now there's a benefit to them to help them reduce their stress so they can heal better. So I thought, okay, now we need to get our people to change. But it's hard to get people to change their ways. So I said, let's start with the people who don't have to change their ways. Third-year medical students. They come into the medical school with the idea of, I want to help. And they keep that in the first 2 years, which are laboratory years. They're not very clinical years. They're not seeing very many patients. But in the third year, they're thrown into seeing a patient. They're supposed to go in and say, I'm the third-year medical student. I'm Ron Coons, a third-year medical student, and I'm here to do take a history, medical history, and do a physical examination. They feel they want to be compassionate, they want to listen, but they've also been taught that modern medicine will not give them many minutes to see every patient. 20 minutes for a new patient and 10 minutes for a patient that they already have seen in the past. And they don't know how to put this together. And then they see the residents who are worked very, very hard, and the faculty members, who have sort of a nonchalant attitude about this. In fact, they may be even be resentful of having to get involved in the patient's thinking. Why don't they want to go along with us? We're giving them the best advice. Why don't they do what we're telling them to do? Why do we have to go in and argue? Why do we have to go in and tell them over and over again why they should do what we're asking them to do? And this kind of attitude, it was expressed very nicely in an article in the New England Journal of Medicine a few months ago, in which a student completing their third year looked back on that year and how the humanness was destroyed. He found one morning that a patient that he had seen for the first time the afternoon before had died. And the attitude was, oh, he died, so you won't have to bother with that anymore. Very nonchalant and non-caring. And he was surprised when a few days later another resident said, gee, wasn't it too bad that so-and-so died? He was pleased to see that someone else had a feeling other than, oh good, less work to do. The feeling that patients are diseases was very appalling to him. So now, he had written that paper. It's now another year later and he's becoming an intern. And he's talking about his feelings and how this getting away from humanism was so devastating. But he's glad that he wrote his paper and now he's thinking about keeping that humanism approach in his internship. And the article is well written. It's an unusual article because also writing a portion of it is the professor who was a mentor to these third-year students. And she's talking about how this process occurs of the hiding the feelings that students have, with their sick patients about not paying attention to the person that has the disease. And so she writes a good portion of the article. Then at the end, they both write together about the importance of putting humanism and compassion back into the study. And the Dalai Lama was here a month or so ago and said that compassion is the essence of life. That compassion, you must have it in yourself. You must have compassion for yourself. You must have humility for yourself. And then you can show compassion to others. And so I put these thoughts together and say, how can we help the students with the time constraints, with a lack of support from their peers, from their role models? How can we put this together? And yet there's a benefit to the patient to be involved. So I'm now encouraging patients, us third-year students, to bring out that humanism by listening to the other person. And that's what you did in your study. You went to these people and asked them questions and listened. And they gave you a story that they perhaps had not really had a deep discussion with before in some situations. It is a privileged position that a student and a physician is in talking with a patient. It's a very intimate one, and it is frequently beneficial for the care of the patient. So I want to honor the people who have been past winners of the Silverman Award. I want to honor the people that have been my mentors, Ron Miller and Jerry Tobis, and I want to honor the third-year students who are coming on, because I think we can make a difference with them and show them that they don't have to be just like their role models. Many of them are good. I want to remind you, I will make it black and white, and of course the world isn't that way. We have some excellent physicians who are very humane with their patients. And the students all make comments about how wonderful that physician is. And of course their patients do too. So I think we can change the system, we can improve it, put humanism back into medicine. Thank you.
May I make a comment or two?
Yes, let me just.
Before I
Let me get these.
step down, I want to give recognition to another awardee of the Silverman Award, namely Ron Miller, an outstanding example of a person who understands the ethics, bioethics, that we all esteem.
The reason I asked to say a few words is, first of all, to express my complete understanding of your award and the rationale for it, and to appreciate enormously what Ron Coons has done over the last 25 years, devoting time to UCI and the School of Medicine. For a long time, when I first met him, he was working with the tumor board and was the only voice of humanism, as he now calls it, out of 30 or 40 physicians talking about patients with cancer. But I also want to say that he is a voice in the wilderness talking about communication with patients, and it is absolutely crucial, as he has pointed out and as he has been successful in doing. But I want to tie it together with this center and with Kristen Monroe. I think tonight's study, and I'd like to talk a little more about it and have interchange of people who may have had similar experiences of opportunities to talk with individuals who have lived through the Holocaust or who were removed from California to Utah or Idaho in order to be a lesser threat because of their Japanese heritage. during World War II. And to relate it to Kristen, as you well know, her work of great excellence has been with regard to altruism and the attempt to understand how people who have suffered so extraordinarily in the Holocaust can nevertheless have values and a sense of person and a sense of pride in what they've been through, despite the hatred they had to have for their persecutors. And in a sense, what Ron is rewarded for here is this ability to communicate with patients who obviously have tragedies in their own lives of varying degree, but nevertheless tragedies that bring them to seek medical care. And so I think it's quite fitting in the sense that this center that Kristen started in order to understand better how individuals who have been persecuted can nevertheless be ethical, can have high moral values. And I think it's her desire to better understand all of this that led to the center and has led to awardees such as Jerry Tovis and tonight Ron Coons. I felt a little bad not to insist that the primary speakers this evening engage us in a question and answer period, because obviously you have a great deal to say above and beyond what was on the presentation. I had the extraordinary privilege personally of knowing a survivor of Auschwitz who refused to talk about it for 20 years of friendship. And it was only when Steven Spielberg sought him out and forced him to be interviewed that he would finally talk about it. He was a little older than the children you speak of, who were a bit oblivious to the persecution that they suffered because they were children of parents who were persecuted because of their Japanese heritage. I also had the privilege of knowing two individuals quite well who were relatively young when their families were deported from California to intercontinental United States. One of them, for example, with 1 day's warning, he and his family had to move to Santa Anita. Now, you may not think Santa Anita is so bad, but the room that he and his family all were put up in, I think there were 5 of them, was a horse stall, still with all the smells of having been a horse stall until days before. One of your earliest slides spoke of ethics, and I was much too slow in understanding what you were trying to communicate there. Maybe we could see the slide again, but I would personally like to understand what you have gotten out of this study of yours in a Ron Coons vein. What are your feelings about talking with individuals, whether they be Holocaust survivors, and they must, for the most part, have been relatively young then, or they would have long since died and you wouldn't have had the opportunity to interview them, or to interview the others from more recent wars, Vietnam, etc., Cambodia. how has this affected you, not just in terms of your careers academically, but as individuals?
You want to answer that question?
Yeah, so your question was how it affected us as individuals after hearing all these interviews, and how it basically affected us as a person.
Right, aside from the fact that you are performing an academic service with Kristen, and I gather this is going to be a book, another book, attempting to understand the altruism of people in the Holocaust, or who saved individuals who were Jews. But how has it affected you personally to have had this privilege to interview this extraordinary group of individuals?
Well, personally, me, I came to Professor Monroe this past fall, after the fall quarter was ending, and I was just looking for research to do. And I was looking for genocide. I was looking for a research topic on genocide. I'm Armenian myself, so my ancestors have gone through a genocide. And I had never had the experience of sitting in front of someone who actually suffered through genocide, because I never met my great-grandmother or my great-grandfather, and never heard a story from a genocide survivor. So me personally, I feel that I was, in my community, Armenian genocide recognition is very important, and it has been recognized till today. And I was wondering, my question to myself was why, because my parents themselves have heard the stories of our ancestors, and they are very touched by these stories, but I never got to make that personal connection to the stories. And I wanted to understand why it was so important for the recognition of genocide in my community and within the Armenian community. And hearing stories, reading stories, I've only read stories about the Holocaust, but hearing their words and hearing what they went through kind of helped me understand how it is important. I mean, the Armenian genocide was the first genocide of our century, of the 20th century. One of the first genocides of the 20th century, and it hadn't been recognized, which could have been the reason why Jewish immigrant had to suffer through a genocide, because it was an example that it hasn't been recognized, so we can keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. So, I mean, I don't know if that was clear, but it was just me trying to make that, I got to make that connection by understanding how the people who suffered through the genocide of the Holocaust felt throughout, and what was taken away from them, and what they had to experience, and why it's so important to hear their stories. And this project that Professor Monroe put together was very interesting to me, just because I get to hear stories of people who hadn't really shared the topic or shared their history or what they went through before. And we were like the first people, we were the first people to hear some of the stories. So I thought it was a great way to help personally sit down with someone, hear their story, and help get something out of it and get some kind of understanding of what they went through, so you can share it with others in the future and see what genocide actually does to a person.
As you did tonight, very nice, so thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think I can give a better answer than that. I think Sean touched upon the main points that I was going to touch on as well. Just recognition of it and having it in a historical document for others, for prevention purposes, or just for others to learn from and hear these experiences, because I think it's extremely important to document these experiences, because these people are eventually going to pass away, and we have a lot to learn about from them, not only about ethics but also about their stories and their lives. And the first, as I mentioned previously, I was in Kristen Monroe's fall 2010 class, and I saw in the syllabus that we had to do a project interviewing somebody who had experienced a war, genocide, or another political disaster. And I'm an exchange student, so I don't really know anybody here in California, but Kristen Monroe put me in touch with the Iranian woman Layla, and I went to interview with her with 2 other boys, and it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, just being able to sit down with somebody who had been through so much and who'd taken these risks, risked her own, not only her own life, but her whole family's life, to save her children, because she was a history professor. I just found it so fascinating that somebody could feel morally, could have such a strong sense of self and have their morals so in place that I wanted to do more research with Professor Monroe, and that's how I kind of got into the project. But as Sean said, recognition and just being able to write it down and hearing these people's stories it's really been wonderful.
Just to share one more thing, doing this research, I still have the question of how someone retains humanity. It's like we mentioned before, it's not so black and white. Everyone's experience is very different. And retaining humanity is still a big question in my mind. Hearing the stories of the people who experienced what they did, and then, like Steve said, retaining some kind of moral and such a high view of self, and moving somewhere else, raising a family with such morals and discipline is just interesting for me to hear. And just, I feel like I have to experience it myself in order to understand how these people kept their humanity.
Just one very personal note. Have you gone to the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles?
Yes.
You might enjoy going there. When you walk into this museum, you're asked to go downstairs. You go down a flight of stairs, and there are 2 doors. And one door says, for those who are prejudiced, and the other door says, for those who are not. Imagine which door is locked.
Oh.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm gonna give him
Perhaps one of
just talking.
Christian's early books, there was an emphasis on people who had never suffered themselves, but when faced with a chance to save people, they immediately said, what else can we do? That's about being human. And I wonder if any of you could comment about that aspect, not just learning from those who have suffered.
Any of you that also read these interviews in terms of this table? Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think it's a DNA code that's in everybody, that when we see somebody hurting, like in the tornadoes, people who had their own concerns about what they're losing and what they're happening to their family, saw immediately somebody else who was in need and helped them. This need to help others in trouble, I think, is universal. And I think that is something that we don't acknowledge and don't help people to understand that it's a real thing and it's valuable. And it's valuable to the person who gives. The old saying, you know, if you give something, you receive 10 times back more. I don't think people really realize how wonderful that really is. On 60 Minutes, they redid this past Sunday the soldier in Iraq who saved his friend, or tried to save his friend, and they gave him the Medal of Honor, the only one that's received it since a veteran from the Vietnam War. And he's very humble. I just did what was expected of me. And I think he was saying what you're saying, is that this is an innate characteristic in people that we all have, and under certain circumstances it comes out and we respond to it in a very generous way.
So I want to actually pick up on the issue of the generosity because there are many people in this room that have been benefactors of Kristen's center. So I just wanted to acknowledge them to the group. First is Betty Vaughn, who we have already acknowledged, but I would like to again applaud her for her wonderful support of the center over the years.
It's my great pleasure.
I'd like to also acknowledge Nancy Silverman for your ongoing support of the center.
Thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge Jerry Tobus
That way,
for
that
his
way over.
ongoing
Her husband.
support of the center.
The one in the red guy.
And finally, the person who puts all of this together, on behalf of Kristen, I would like to say thanks. This work ensures that these events go on year after year. And thank you so much, and that the center runs so smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the formal program this evening. I know that there may be some additional conversation that people may want to have one-on-one, but for the formal program, thank you very much on behalf of Kristen Monroe, and good night.
Thank you.